Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Goldmoney Asian Wrap. It is the second day of the semifinals. After today, we will know our two finalists, and we will know the two people competing for the third and fourth place spot. Now, going into today, Ding Liren is up 1-0 in his mini-match versus Vladislav Artemiev, and Magnus Carlsen has a 1-0 lead versus Levon Aronian. Now, I've put timestamps on the video player, as always, for the two matches side by side. You better not skip ahead. I caught some of you yesterday. And I saw your comments that you felt guilty. Well, today, learn from your mistakes and be better and do better. So, game number one between Ding Liren and Vladislav Artemiev ended in a draw. And I am taking you to the second game of their rapid. Now, Artemiev begins with c4, and we have a g3 kind of king's bishop English thing going on here. With bishop b4, this is a very common move that black plays, and very often black will take on c3 if this knight doesn't move, and then play d6 and h6. Now, in this game, if black takes on c3 and plays d6 and h6, you gotta click the PayPal link in the description and donate $1, okay? No, I'm just kidding. You don't actually have to do that. And by the way, that here we go. That does in fact happen. And the reason you do this is because you need to reinforce on the dark squares. You know, bishop g5 is how I want to develop my position. The doubled pawns for white. White isn't overly concerned about that because that, if anything, will lead to a space advantage on the queen side. Black has a very strong central blockade, though. And if white is unable to do anything about it, black is going to be very happy. So Artemiev plays very slowly, h3, g4, and actually here plays g5. So he slow crawls into the position to activate his dark squared bishop, and then plays h4. And his point is that if you take me, I have an open rook, I will bring my queen, I will mate you. I'll also castle long. Now Ding Liren's no dummy, so he just plays f5. He doesn't actually take this bishop. Queen d2, bishop e6, b3, a5, a4. So white says, I don't want you doing anything on the queen side. Rook a6, and Ding says, well, I don't need my pawns to do anything on the queen side, I need my rook. Knight a3, and now if you ever play rook b6, I will play knight b5. So Artemiev puts his knight on b5 and just has a very pleasant position. Queen goes to f7 to defend against knight takes c7, which would have forked absolutely everybody. Bishop back to f4, knight to f6, and h5. And Artemiev is just attacking on two sides without actually committing his king anywhere, which is making this very difficult because even though black has a central blockade, black does not have any central mobility to attack the king. Black blocked the center. So white just played on the left side and the right side of the board and not down the middle. So now it's really tough for Ding because, Artemiev finally plays this move f3, and f3 is a very tricky move. The point is that if you make this trade, and of course pawn takes f3, also possible, but he goes here to prevent knight h5 and ask Ding whether or not he wants to make this exchange. If he were to make this exchange, that actually opens up the position, right? You would think, well, then, yeah, but now I actually go long. You say, wait a minute, well, why didn't he do this earlier? Well, because the center wasn't open. I mean, Artemiev was trying to keep things flexible. So he wasn't castling yet because the center wasn't open. Now that he's going to open up the center of the board, you know, anticipating, right, he goes long. Because black made it very clear that he's put his pawns on these two squares, but you're never actually going to successfully break through my queen side unless you either sacrifice a piece on c4 or play d5, which would blunder a pawn, a rook, a cow, you know, a car. Yeah, it would be very bad. So Ding takes on b5. Now, of course, Artemiev has a choice. Does he take with a or c? Folks, I will leave it up to you. Do you take with the a or the c pawn? Incorrect. You take with the c-pawn, but they always say take toward the center. Yeah, but not if you can lose your entire blockade immediately with a4, rook a8, etc. So you have to take like this because that keeps the queen side glued shut. But Gotham c4! But viewer, free rook. No, d5. And here we have rook takes d5. And I mean, his bishops are dominant. He's now completely dominating down the center of the board. We have a big explosion. Knight back to d7. And the rest of this game, right up until this, is just an endgame where white is a clear pawn up. And the pawn is not allowing the king to move. This glob of pawns still exists very much. These are weaknesses. And this game proceeded to last 40 more moves. I will slowly take you through it. It became a rook endgame where Artemiev went for b4. Now, Artemiev did not have to necessarily play rook g1 allowing knight f6. He could have played rook f1 trying to go here, and the game would have ended much sooner. But he did this, and we got a rook endgame where he used the queenside mass that he had to get this endgame, king h6, rook b4, and try to win this 3-on-2. He didn't have to do this, but he does. Look, he plays rook c6, guarded by his b-pawn, rook goes here, takes. Practically speaking, this is probably winnable for white. Maybe there is a slight chance that black holds this, but let's also keep in mind that there is the time factor. So time is very low, so probably this is harder to defend than it is to attack. To attack it, you just do what Artemiev is doing. You move your pawns, your king, and rook up, and at some point you prevent your opponent from doing the same, and once your pawns and king are all together, your rook comes back to protect, your king comes to protect, and at a certain moment you can even sacrifice the rook for the pawn and just move your pawns up the board, and exactly that happens. This rook cannot defend against 2 pawns and a king. It can defend against 1 pawn and a king, but not 2 pawns, and it becomes queen versus rook, which is winning. You need to demonstrate some technique. You need to bring your king and queen very close to the enemy king, and you need to not blunder a stalemate. And what I mean by that is there are some positions where you can like get checked and accidentally have to take, and it will be a stalemate. Not in this particular case, but there are some positions where it is possible. So king to e3, king h2, and you'll notice he's just slowly taking the squares away. Queen f4, king h3. I'll give you an example, like let's say here, rook f1. Oops, you're x-rayed, and if you take it, stalemate. That's the only real trick, but that doesn't happen. He geometrically takes all the squares away from his opponent, makes the rook go all the way over there, and now there's going to be some geometric ladder that he'll do, where the queen will hit this rook and this king at the same time. And so in this position, Artemiev Dingley Ren resigned, because this check would come, which would lead to the loss of this piece. And there you go. Actually, Vladislav Artemiev has hit the scoreboard first. He is up 1.5 to half versus Dingley Ren. So now we go to rapid game number 3. Can Artemiev win this game and force the Blitz playoff? Or can Dingley Ren win and force a 4th game of rapid? So we have this f3 move. Anytime your opponent is going to play the Grunfeld or the King's Indian, really f3 is beneficial against the Grunfeld player, because if you play, for example, knight c3, d5, well, cd5, knight d5, right? But if they're going to play a Grunfeld here, it just doesn't work, because now white goes here, you don't get to trade the knight on c3. This is an entirely different position, and a Grunfeld player might not like this very much. Whereas if you're playing against the King's Indian player, they couldn't care less what you do. They're going to play this every time, and then white would play a same-ish King's Indian, which is just standard. But Artemiev plays knight c6, which is super confrontational, and invites d5, knight e5, e4, and you dance around in the center of the board like this. You allow white to kick your knights around, and basically your argument is the fact that white is going to overextend. Now here, Dingley Ren plays a fascinating move. He goes into his little toolbox, and he plays knight to h3, knight b6, and knight f2. This is some big brain meta stuff. Excuse me, I have to scratch my nose. I'm going to investigate this line after the game, knight h3, knight f2. I just literally downloaded all the games as they happened, and I'm making this recap like 10 minutes after the games are over. You guys always like to commend my work ethic and my grind. Well, listen, there is a little bit of truth to that. I'm here all the time trying to make the best content as soon as possible. But having said that, I did sacrifice the fact that I don't know anything about knight h3, knight f2. The point is that you solidify the structure, and maybe in the future you will play g4. And if the move does get played in the future, you have to click the PayPal link and donate $2 this time. Oh, there it is. So Ding basically says, look, Vladislav, your setup is idiotic. I'm going to delay my own castling, and I'm just going to attack you. Basically, you have no central presence in the center. Central presence in the center. Smart English, man. Here, takes, h4. Yeah, this is some New Age chess, or like some 17th century chess, where they just attacked each other, had no regard for development. I mean, Dingley Ren's just going for it, just trying to literally refute Black's entire existence. A4, bishop a6, I mean, and Artemiev just goes for counterplay. Finally, he's ready to go get counterplay down the middle of the board. If you take the knight, I take you with check, you then just lose the game. So it's some legitimacy to this move knight d5, except for the fact that it relies on Dingley Ren to take, and if he just doesn't take and plays a move like rook a3, well, now he's going to maybe transfer the rook over here and just continue his attack. Now, rook a3 is a slight inaccuracy because it allows this. And if b takes c3 in this position while your rook is blockaded, and after bishop takes e2, queen e2, black can go here and just hit this, and white is lost. So Artemiev can actually just make this very difficult for white after rook a3, knight takes c3. Clearly he didn't like that, and he went this way instead, but this allows this interesting move, king f1, sidestepping the rook on the e-file, and then just escorting the king out, like underneath the White House, the tunnel. There's going to be violence, rook h4, anticipating that as the board opens up, you can triple stack and go down to h8. We have c5, we have bishop to c4, lining up to the king. Artemiev plays this explosive move, d5, and now pandemonium breaks loose. Dingley Ren takes with the knight. We have knight c, ed, and Vladislav Artemiev's idea here was the fact that your bishop is blocked. But he should have done something about that. Rather than going back for the pawn and trying to open up the bishop again, he needs to play bishop f5. He needs to try to get to c2, try to get to the central complex of squares and, on the dark squares over here. But instead he plays passively with bishop b7, looking to win back the pawn, and that immediately takes its eye off of the f5 square, and Dingley Ren just goes all out. f5, here we go. G takes f5, queen h5, and Dingley Ren has arrived. Bishop takes d5 check. Rook blocks on f3. Absolutely fascinating move. It turns out this rook is not serving the purpose of attack, but rather the purpose of sacrificing itself for the greater good. Knight to c2, looking to hit on e1 and destroy everything. Dingley Ren just keeps pushing forward. Knight to e1, king h3. What's going to happen first? Is Dingley Ren going to checkmate Artemiev, or is Artemiev going to refute this entire attack and force a rapid playoff? In this position, he has a very difficult decision. Does he take on f3 with the knight? Does he take on f3 with the bishop? Or does he take on c4? He chooses to take on c4, which is the top computer move. Dingley Ren now brings his rook out of danger to g3. He is down 4 points of material. He has a devastating attack ready to uncork. And here, rather than being aggressive with the move bishop to f1 check, which is an absolutely ludicrous move, after king h2 taking on g6 and calling the bluff completely, Artemiev played the human move, which is queen f6, and after g takes f7, he cannot prevent queen to h8 mate if he recaptures. And he must have missed this, because he now has to play this move, and just so you see that's mate, because you cannot take. He plays king f8, but now Dingley Ren takes on e8 with check, and plays this. And the bishop is lost, the rook is lost, and all of a sudden it is Dingley Ren from -4 to +4, queen e6, rook f4, and Artemiev is forced to resign. Dingley Ren goes all out in this game to win it, and he wins it successfully, forcing a 4th rapid game. Now, if Ding doesn't lose this game, if this game is a draw or he wins it, he clinches this entire match. So here we go. Artemiev plays the London. d5, e3, c5, knight to c3. A creative move, definitely an interesting move, trying to get to b5. So we have cd4, ed4, a6. This is actually how I play this, and I wait for this knight to come out, and then I play bishop to g4. But instead we have this. That's actually the problem. If you play knight c6, they can play knight e5, and if you play like this, here they can play the ultra-uber confrontational move g4. And I mean, when you gotta play for a win, you gotta play moves like g4. Not on move 1, but you can play the Grob if you want, and g5. I mean, knight e5, bishop e5, I mean, what is this? What, like, this looks like 2 5-year-olds are playing the game. Like, bishop e5, queen h5, like, what are we doing? Like, there's no threat, right? So, knight e7, bishop d3, knight c6. This knight has gone on a journey. It went out, came back, went to e7, tries to now impersonate the other knight, which got traded off. Dingley Ren just wants to play this position solidly, whereas Artemiev is trying to crush him. I mean, because he has to try to win the game. g6. Knight takes e5. You have to take like this, because otherwise, f7 was protected. And Dingley Ren goes here. And here the thing is, if you take on f7 and queen f7, like, you're not going to beat Dingley Ren in this endgame. You just have this just doesn't work. So instead we get long castles. Dingley Ren castles long and allows the capture on f7 because he can play g6. But now bishop g6. And of course, if takes, you lose the rook, so he goes here. So he's now down 2 pawns. But again, he's like, look, I don't know what you're doing here. I'm going to win 1 pawn back. I'm going to win 2 pawns back. Artemiev says, well, I mean, hey, man, if you're going to play a position where you want to be a pawn down, be my guest. I mean, I have 6 pawns, you have 5. Like, I don't have to checkmate you. I can just beat you in a game of chess. And after this, it seems quite clear that Dingley Ren's going to win his pawn back, but king d1. And king d1 is so important because when you sidestep the check, the h7 pawn is destabilized. What does f4 have to do with h7? The rook on f7 hits both, and it can't account for both. So after bishop f4 and a trade, we have this, and Dingley Ren is still down a pawn. He's down the h-pawn. I don't know, he deliberately went for this, and he must have thought that he was fine. Particularly, maybe he thought rook h5. And h4, rook e5. The problem is that you can't stop the pawn now. It's a runaway freight train. You have two pieces, and they're not equipped to stop the pawn. But Gotham, look! Oh, sorry, well, I mean, hey, maybe you guys would have played that move. Gotham, look! You can't stop the pawn, stupid! Yeah, but what about rook g1? Don't just stop your thought here. What is white gonna do? Like, oh, shucks, I can't get my pawn through. No, white's gonna go here and here. And, like, if for some reason your bishop covered, it doesn't even matter. I just get, like, even if I give you an extra move, you're just not equipped. Well, what if the king was on f8? Yeah, but that's 5 extra moves. I mean, no. I can give you 1 or 2 extra moves, not 5 or 6. So now d4, and now Artemiev just begins the process of consolidating around his h-pawn. He defends it, but he still makes a mistake. He still allows Ding to activate all his pieces. But Ding, the daredevil, is just continuously trying to give away pawns in this game for some reason. King f2, b5, king g3, rook h8. Like, Dingley Ren's trying to beat Artemiev down a pawn. I mean, I don't really understand what's going on. He's being super aggressive with his pawns. b3, rook g8, king h2. Rook h8, king g3. Repeat moves? No, we can't. Artemiev has to win this game. King f4. Rook f8, king g5, rook g8, king f6, like, let's go, I'm coming in, rook g6, king e7, king d5, centralizing and winning the e-pawn, because rook e2 is playable, but I mean, there's some unpleasant stuff there. So he plays bishop c4, king e5. Okay, now Artemiev's not even up a pawn anymore. What is going, is Dingley Ren actually just straight up gonna win this game? Bishop e6, bishop e6, rook e6, rook to g7 check. Now here, Dingley Ren should have played rook g3. This hits this pawn and wants to go to c3. And if you can go to c3, you can probably play d3, explode all of this, and maybe hold. Dingley Ren plays check. That allows Artemiev to at least hang around for one more move, and he goes rook g2. Now the difference of rook g2 versus rook g3 originally is that you're allowing Artemiev's king to get closer. Think about that. This check just allowed his king to get closer. And I think what might have been missed here is that I don't have to play this. I don't have to play that move at all. I think Dingley Ren in this scramble missed the fact that that king on d5, which you've just allowed to come there, allows rook e4 check. And I can win your pawn with my rook rather than with my king, which ultimately leads to me winning your b pawn with my rook, which ultimately leads to me protecting the b pawn with my rook, which ultimately leads to me also boxing out your king. You have everything going wrong for you, and in this position, there is one move that allows white to play for a win. Do you know what it is? Rook b5 check? No! In rook endgames, these checks are unnecessary. Rook to b6. Learn from the check that Dingley Ren gave. Cuts off the king in multiple directions and allows you to escort the pawn. And Artemiev, super clutch, gets his king out of there. Now, Dingley Ren's king does get closer, but rook h6. So when you are defending endgames like this, rook and pawn versus rook, you can look up my video. It's not too popular because it's a very study-like chess video. When you need to defend a rook endgame, you have to defend on the short side. Short side defense is what it's called. And right now, that's not the short side. Or there's also the Philidor position, which is where the pawn is trying to advance beyond the third rank, and the king needs to be in front. And he has neither of these things. His king is being shouldered away, and he's on the long side. So he gets checked, booted off the c-file, and now cut off, and he can't get close. Rook a1, king b7, you escort the pawn. You escort the pawn, and you give this check, and you go here, and there's a tactical trick. And the tactical trick is that rook takes b6 is met with rook c2, and that is exactly how the game ends, because if this, then this, and if this, then this. And Vladislav Artemiev, from the depths of hell, has emerged with a 2.5, 1.5 victory in the rapid portion, which means that the rapid is all square, which means that it's game on. We now play 2 blitz games to determine whether or not we play Armageddon. Now, the first blitz game that they played was a draw, which takes me to my second blitz game. And you're like, oh man, Levy, now I know. Is there going to be Armageddon? You wouldn't show this game if there was going to be Armageddon. Well, take a look. So Artemiev now goes back to what he's been playing a lot. He plays this, but he doesn't play d3, he plays b3. He's played this and this and this, knight d2, this, but he plays b3, just Tufi and Keto will figure it out. c4 this time. Okay, d4. Now my bishop's going to be powerful. I play b4, interesting move, trying to get you to take to win this pawn. We have queen c7, bc5, and e5. Ding Liren takes full control of the center. e3, bishop g4. We have a massive struggle for the center of the board here. The bishop takes on f3. We have queen takes attacking b7. Knight to c6, takes, d3, and bishop c5. And when the dust has settled, it is white who has the bishop pair, the dominant control of this light square diagonal. Knight d2, knight b3 to kick this bishop out. Looks pretty darn good. And actually, this position kind of resembles a Benko gambit, but reversed. And if that means nothing to you, that's absolutely fine. Don't even worry about it. Queen to f5 hits this, and the bishop is super powerful. Although in some of those positions in the Benko, this bishop is here. I guess it also kind of looks like a reverse Benoni, but rook e8 and knight b3 tries to get the bishop pair. Ding Liren obliges. He says, you can have my bishop pair, except Ding Liren completely forgets about the fact that this is actually the target. Like knight fd7, knight c5. Okay, sure, knight c5 or queen c5. I mean, still white is doing well, but but bishop takes d4. Takes g6. I mean, white is just a pawn up. White is just one pawn up. Queen d8. And okay, Ding has nice control with the knights, but the knight just moves out of the way. And the thing is, if you take on d3, okay, sure, this is fine. But queen e4, it's not fine at all. You're completely paralyzed. Everything is paralyzed, and I'm going to go to b7. Would have been even stronger to go here and attack the a7 pawn. But queen e4, rook e7, and now just a very nice move f4, removing the protection over here. The only way not to lose here is to play this very timely queen check, which forces Artemiev to trade like this. And after rook d8, trying to counterattack the knight, he has a very nice move here, interposing with the rook on d8, bishop d5. And this is a serious problem. You are protecting, you are shielding the knight and the rook. Ding Liren goes for tactics, knight takes c4, both his knights are hanging. If you take one and I take here, then after bishop takes d3, I've emerged with two horses. Rook e3. Bishop moves, rook g3, king to f2, which is a very nice move, because if you play a move like king h2, I have rook d1, maybe I hang around, king h2 also okay, but this forces this. And now the king is safely walking toward the f-pawn, protecting it, the bishop is safe, the bishop targets everything over here, rook is coming down the middle of the board, your king's not stranded over on the side, so king f2, in my opinion, slightly better than the other one, and now just king g3, and you have to not lose both your pawns here. This is the way you're going to win this game. If you lose both your pawns, it's just going to be a draw most likely. So one pawn is lost for black. And how is white going to win this? White is going to win this by playing a way of getting this rook away from the pawns. And this move. This move. Rook d5 is how you're going to win it. Takes, b4, king h4. And the good thing for you is your flank pawn is the same color corner as the bishop. So that's easily winning. And f5, oh, such an important move to break apart the black structure. If takes, king g5 is ultra important. King takes h5, you might also win, but don't allow the king to even get close. h4 and king f5, he actually takes that pawn first, then goes to hunt this pawn down. And while Ding Liren continued to play some moves, but this is very easily winning because the black king just runs out of squares. And again, this is a draw if this is a dark squared bishop. And because that's because this king can go over here. But since it's a light squared bishop, it just simply doesn't even matter. You get the king away, and Ding Liren resigns. And Ding Liren, despite winning that third game, unable to hold on in the rapid and loses in the blitz. Artemiev, one of the best blitz players in the world. It took me 23 minutes to cover this portion of the match. But wow, Ding Liren, huh? Unfortunate. And Vladislav Artemiev is moving on, and he is our first finalist. Which takes me to Magnus Carlsen versus ARONIAN. And if you skip to this part, despite my warning in the beginning, I'm watching you. Okay. We're going to start off in game number 1. This was a 90 move game. So in this game, we had a Rui Lopez, and we had one where Magnus just went a little wild. Magnus played knight h4. And his idea was to try to put the knight on f5 because nobody covers that. Now, ARONIAN was more than happy to anticipate this knight transfer with a knight transfer of his own, knight to e7, and then king to h8. And king to h8, we've seen Wesley play in a few games where he's trying to play f5, maybe g5. Magnus continues to instigate with the horses, and look at Levon. Just no. I'm gonna bring my knight back. I'm ready to advance with my pawns. And he does. In some time, he ends up playing this move, g6. Now, just a quick side note there. Knight d5 is a nice move that he played, because if pawn takes, this queen hits the knight, and white's attack actually is now turned around immediately back on him, because this pawn is a target. f5, g5, f4 is coming. This is very, very bad. This is a very nice move, knight d5, playing against Magnus's weak knight on h4, and forces Magnus to take a position where he doesn't have the bishop pair, and he's actually just straight up under attack. Like, he thought he was attacking, but Levon consolidates everything, brings his king, and this was a maneuvering game. We're on move 26 out of 92. So I'm going to continue to press the forward button as the players try to figure out what's going on here. Levon is jumping around with his knight. Magnus just goes bishops versus horses. Magnus takes, and now we have bishops versus horses. Now, this is probably the worst dark squared bishop of all time. So in the meantime, Levon's going to have to do some things with his queen pawn and maybe something over here. He goes to consolidate the queen side and plays rook b3 to create some counterplay. Knight comes into d5. We have no trades for a while. We end up having a trade on the 40th move. It looks like Magnus is making some pretty thorough progress with this bishops versus knights, but now comes f5 and the game gets completely wild. First of all, after f5, knight takes e5 is just winning for white. If takes, rook e6. But if knight e5, fe4, that looks like a bit of a problem, but you have this move, sacrificing your queen with check, and rook b8. And after f5, I mean, they obviously didn't have a lot of time. Magnus doesn't see knight e5. He plays queen g3, looking for a trade of queens. Levon doesn't even hesitate, explodes everything off the board, and he's still slightly worse in this endgame, because Magnus dominating the bishop pair. All the pawns are on the same color square, but Levon just wouldn't give up. Look at this. e4, rook f5. Man is turning lemons into lemonade. I mean, my position is terrible, but now with the queen trade, you've damaged your structure. I've won a pawn. Wait a minute, I'm playing this for a win. And once my pawns get mobile, you know what's going to happen to my bishop? It's going to activate. My bishop was very patient. It stayed on c7 for like 35 moves, and now I've activated it, and it's won a pawn. And you know what else? Okay, Magnus, you can do this. That's fine. I'm still a pawn up. You're Whoa, you're getting active. Okay, I'm going to take that pawn too. I'll take that pawn too. Yeah, Magnus, you can have my d pawn. That's absolutely fine. But who's going to protect the h4 pawn? That h4 pawn's a target. Okay, I mean, my king's not looking too happy. I'm not going to trade rooks just yet. Don't trade rooks just yet. Don't trade rooks just yet. Continue to check the king. Maybe it's a draw, but we got no time on the clock. Maybe you're going to blunder something. Wait, Gotham, didn't you just say not to trade rooks? Yes, not yet. You know what happened in all of this shuffling? The black king moved to g7. One king move, and now when the rooks trade, the black king can go here, and white has no moves. The knight is stuck guarding this. See, in the other line, the king could have gone to h3. And once the king gets to h3, it's a draw. It's a draw. But because this king cannot get to h3 in time, this is losing for white. And that's exactly what Levon does. And once he's able to win the second pawn, he's just winning. And Levon Aronian, in 90 moves, defeats Magnus Carlsen in their first rapid game. What just happened? Now, they drew their next two games. So it was 2-1. Aronian Carlsen, and that takes me to their fourth rapid game. Magnus has to win with the black pieces. What do you do when you have to play with the black pieces for a win? Well, against e4, you can consider the French. The French is quite interesting. What's the major problem with playing the French for a win with black? White can do this. Oops. Now your position is literally completely symmetrical. So black is the one that has to fight to break the symmetry, but white just plays a very solid line c4. And if you play this for a win with black, it's so tough. I mean, we basically have like an isolated pawn French. This can also happen from a queen's gambit accepted. After knight c6, h3, h6, this is almost impossible to play for a win with black. Every time I try to play this for a win with the black pieces, I end up just losing because you just have no business playing this for a win with black. White just does a bunch of nothing and then plays this move, and now you're going to trade all the pieces. So after bishop e5, de5, now we don't have queens on the board, and we also don't have a pair of minor pieces, and Levon just develops everything quickly. Delays recapturing on e6, right? Now we have knight to d4, but just here hits the bishop. Bishop to d3 is a very nice move, actually, because there's this. But we have rook d1, rook f4, rook d3, c5, and now the explosion. Takes. And, well, yeah. I mean, Magnus has to try to play this for a win. So he tries to get aggressive. I mean, it's a draw, but he has to win to... And he's unable to do it. In fact, here he just resigns. Because he would just be a pawn down in a knight endgame, and he didn't want to try to defend this. And he's like, all right, let's play blitz. So Levon strikes back. Levon has struck back in the rapid. And one thing I didn't mention about the third game, which was like 130 moves, Magnus actually was winning in the third game. And he ended up drawing, which probably took definitely some wind out of his sails. And now we have a blitz. So we go to the blitz, things are totally spiraling out of control. Levon's got the white pieces, and we have another e4, e5, Ruy Lopez. Okay, great, we have a Ruy Lopez on the board. This was also an extremely long game, but Magnus made it super interesting super quickly. In this position, rather than just playing bishop e7 or b5 or even g6, bishop g7, Magnus Carlsen took on e4. This is super bold, because after d4, bishop d7, rook e1, I mean, you are opening up the e-file against yourself. And listen, this is not for the faint of heart. Knight goes back to f6, the center of the board explodes, bishop to e7, bishop g5. If I can take here and you cannot take back because of this, it's a problem. If you castle, you're probably just going to lose the game. In fact, you do just lose the game because you lose this. Now, I was thinking bishop d6, maybe there's some trick, but there isn't. Bishop f6, queen f6, and I don't know, rook literally anywhere is fine. So, Magnus takes on a4. Levon takes back with check, trades, and plays knight to d2. And now Levon's got a little bit of an advantage just because the king is stuck in the center, the bishop is on e7. Magnus tries to, you know, get fancy with it with the move knight g4. We have rook d1, bishop d6, rook f5. And Levon is just poking. He's like, hey, everything's safe over here. Magnus has a choice here. Does he play f6 and prevent rook takes pawn? Or, yeah, that's like the only move that I thought he could play, and then he went here. Rook f7, and I suppose he thought he was trapping this rook? Rook g7, g5, and now the bishop has to go, and the bishop does have to go, and the rook does get attacked. Rook d7, king e6. Are we gonna repeat moves? No. Bishop takes d6 is possible, and once you take, I just come back, discover check, rook attacks, and this. Levon is now a pawn up again. Just like he was at the end of the last game. So now how does Levon win? h3 kicks out the knight. Knight centralizes. Knight to d7. Look at that beautiful tactic. If knight takes, rook check, and I just take all your pawns. So king f7, we trade. Look at this confidence by Levon. Rook n6 versus rook n5. Let's go, Magnus. Let's go. So I'm going to play rook to d1 to try to get to d7. You play here. I play here. Your rook cannot get closer. Rook e5, rook d4. We have a little bit of pawn play. King f2, rook b5, b3, rook e5. h4, very important flank pawn push, trying to see what you're doing over there. Now h5, super important flank pawn push, freezing your structure. Now I can always sneak around back, and I'm not even necessarily always going here. I'm going to go over to g6, also very important square. Rook e5, g4, look at that. He locks that structure. Maybe f4 is going to become useful in the future, or go in this way. So, more pawn play, king e3, c6, rook e4, we have a trade, and another clutch move. Trade rooks with me? Nope, because that's a losing pawn endgame. No rook trade. If no rook trade? No rook trade. Well, then I'm just going to infiltrate with my rook. I play king d2 to actually pass the turn back to you, because here you have no moves. It's Sukswang. If you play king h7 is basically the only move now, because you have no other move. You can't move your rook. I'll take this. You obviously can't trade with me, so Magnus does this. And he could take that. Levon can take that, and he does, but first he gives him a check, and the rest is what we call cleanup. Now Levon is up 2 pawns, everything is frozen. Magnus isn't taking the pawn on a3 because that would allow the king to come up the board. So he's not taking the pawn, and by the time the moves are done, Levon is still just very calmly 2 pawns up, and here Magnus Carlsen resigns. I mean, Levon ARONIAN is truly just unstoppable at the moment, and now it all comes down to the second blitz game. Will Magnus Carlsen win this game? He's got to win with the white pieces. e4, e5. Knight f3, knight c6. We have a Gioco Pianissimo once again. d6. And Magnus goes for this. He goes for bishop g5. Because when you got to win with the white pieces, you need to induce your opponent to play the move g5. And Levon actually obliges. He actually plays the move g5. After bishop g3, knight h5, he's going for it. You know what the craziest thing is after this? Magnus Carlsen could have taken. He could have taken. This is actually very dangerous for black. Because, for example, let's say, like, I don't know, king g7. b4, knight c6, kicks out the knight, queen f3. You have this lingering pressure on this knight, and you can play this position. Knight c4, knight e3, try to get to f5, g4. But Magnus didn't do it. He backed up. And now, Levon just trades and comes back, and this is a totally different story. Knight h2, okay, g4, but okay, so what? I mean, how are you going to win this position? You can only hope to break in the center. And Magnus does go for it, but after takes and d4, I mean, Levon's he's just waiting around. There's just nothing white can do. Knight c4, d5. Magnus was too hesitant. And after e5, counterattack, there's a very nice move here. Just queen c6. You're threatening to take, and you're threatening the weak pawn on c3. Magnus goes for b5. So now Magnus is like, all right, I'm going to lose 2 pawns here, and I'm definitely lost. But I'm going to counterattack to the death. A takes b5, a b5, queen b5, knight d2. Magnus is like, I'm down 2 pawns. It's fine. It's fine. Queen c2, bishop b1. We're going for it. I'm going to land the knight on f5, and I'm going to break through. And now it's all up to Levon. Can he stabilize this in time as both players' time ticks under 1 minute? c5, knight f3, takes. Wait, what? Rook a7? Magnus is sacrificing. Knight d4, queen b6, knight f5. Here it comes. Do you take or not? You can, but that allows gf5. King to h8, knight f3, fg, rook h1. It doesn't matter. I'm right there. This is on the way. Knight h6 is on the way with the discovered attack and potential to take on g6. And Levon Aronian plays the clutchest move of the tournament, absolutely poking a hole in Magnus's balloon. Queen to f2, forcing the simplification of queens. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is all over. King g8, he brings his second rook, and it was in this position. Magnus Carlsen called it a day after suffering a devastating loss of material. The infiltration of the 2 black rooks, didn't get his knight takes g5 early in the opening, was slowed down right away, and Levon Aronian wins both blitz games to take the 2-1 match, coming back. 2 comebacks today in the semifinals. And we've got Aronian versus Artemiev. We'll have Magnus versus Dingley Ren for 3rd and 4th place. And that concludes the 7th day of the Goldmoney Asian Rapid. What a twist. If you made it this far in the video, I appreciate you very much. If you didn't skip ahead, I appreciate you even more. Folks, take care, and I will see you tomorrow for the finals. Peace out. Get out of here.